Good evening, everyone. Welcome to today's podcast on European medieval music heritage, its importance through present perspectives. My name is Olga Soulachaki, and I'm thrilled to be here as the co-founder and art director of Imagine Heritage nonprofit. Imagine Heritage is dedicated to preserving, promoting cultural heritage, and our mission is to bring richness of history into the contemporary world through innovative projects and collaborations. Today, we have the pleasure of hosting this podcast alongside the remarkable Sibil Ensemble. The Sibil Ensemble is famous for their beautiful performances of medieval music, bringing old melodies and stories to life with real passion. They not only preserve this important music heritage, but also make it accessible and relevant for today's audiences. Kristia Michael, voice, gothic harp, artistic director. Andrew Hopper, voice, vielle, cittern, rebec. Marguerite Maire, recorder. Jeremy bass, medieval lute. Ivan Gianakis, percussion. Spiridon Kogas, the CEO and co-founder of Imagine Heritage nonprofit and the lead editor of Thrausma Journal publications. So let's start with Kristia. Please talk to us about the inspiration behind the creation of your ensemble album.
Hello, Praveen. Thank you so much for having us here. It's such a pleasure to have this talk with you and share our views and work. So we founded this ensemble in 2021, somehow feeling the need to create a team in The Hague, especially where we are all based, to share and work on such an ancient music. So Sibils were our inspiration, which are the female prophetesses that appeared through pagan times, and their idea lasted until the Renaissance. And we started looking, first of all, Hildegard von Bingen, the Sibyl of the Rhine, as she's known to, was a very special figure of the 12th century. And through her, we somehow started exploring mostly music from the 12th and 13th centuries. And then we started exploring traditions through this journey. And Cyprus actually played a bit of an important role because I am from Cyprus too. And we started looking at some manuscripts that we have from the island. And a month ago, we did a performance in Cyprus with connecting the Western tradition with the Cypriot folk music. So yes, the strongest inspiration came from the fact that we feel the need to search this past of West and in general connect more with traditions and folk music that preserve these sources. I hope, do you hear other voices too? I hope it's...
No, we don't hear any other voice.
There's some noise outside. And to really get it more involved and in contact with the sources and the philosophy of medieval art in general, as we find it very relevant to the present and very important for us to somehow remember these ideas and share them through our profession, which is music and sound.
This must be a very enchanting journey. I would also like, Andrew, we would love to hear about the importance of preserving European music heritage.
Yeah, okay, I'm sorry. There we are. Yeah, okay, this is an interesting question. I mean, with regards to what we do, I don't even know what that question means in that context. I mean, what is the heritage of medieval music? I mean, there's not exactly like an unbroken line of performance of Hildegard. I mean, we're bringing something back and presenting it in inevitably going to be a modern way. So I'm not sure. And I think I'm not even sure if I think about the idea of preserving European heritage in this context. It's how to say, it's more, it's trying to bring, sorry, I haven't really put my brain in order yet. Let me think. Yeah, well, I mean, we're presenting something from this sort of distant past, which people have their own ideas and conceptions about. You know, say the general public have ideas and perceptions about medieval Europe, which are often quite wrong. And are we preserving it? No, that's not the intention. We're, you know, presenting it, I guess, representing it, to try and do what? That's the question. I guess show the links between, you know, the sort of the human constant between now and then, the things which are kind of universal to, at least, you know, I mean, universal, be careful with that, but quite universal in the sort of human experience. But preserving, I don't know, I don't really think in those terms. I guess I used to. I was a bit more of a historically informed kind of pedant a few years back, and I think I've lost a lot of that in the last few years. So yeah, I'm not sure how to answer the question really, and I'm not sure I think in those terms. Oh, hang on, looks like Jeremy has a.
Yeah, if I may, I think one interesting thing about medieval music in particular is that a lot of it was not written down at the time. You know, we often have fragments of melodies or, you know, accounts that people played certain instruments in certain contexts and so on. But we often don't have a complete picture of the music itself. And so I think when we talk about playing medieval music in an ensemble like ours with various types of instruments and voices, I think that it's not so much a matter of preserving a practice as it is recreating that practice, and you know, looking for kind of creative ways to, you know, reproduce what people might have heard back then, using what we know about the time period and so on, but also, you know, using our imaginations in an informed way, of course.
Yeah, I think that's, yeah, I go with that. I mean, preserve has such a kind of museum quality to it. And I can't really think of any music. Well, okay, no, I'll take it back. There are some musical traditions which are definitely about preservation. I think a lot of the classical music world, whether it's conscious of it or not, is all about preservation, and not just about music, about other things like glass and, you know, that kind of stuff. And I think what we perform at least is free of a lot of that baggage. I think that's quite freeing, actually. But yeah, I mean, like reproducing as well. Like, I mean, the further back you go, I mean, once you go back past, you know, when there's no more recordings, any attempts to reproduce what happened is increasingly fraught with problems. And again, I like this freedom. We know so little really about anything that we perform in a very healthy way. And so yeah, I mean, yeah, you know, we read sources, we do whatever, but ultimately a lot of what we do is, I wouldn't even say guesswork because that sounds a bit unfair, but it's yeah, it's a sort of reaction to what's in front of us, which inevitably is going to be modern. And I think you sort of have to be honest about that. I think a lot of the early music movement is not always honest about that. But yeah, it's an interesting area we operate in, I think.
Yeah, and if I may add something that in general, the medieval music world, the contemporary one, I somehow feel that we all have the need to share some views of the past and some philosophical ideas that are behind and connected with music. We had music back then as one of the most important fields of education. It was near mathematics, near geometry, astronomy. And on the religious part, it was one of the elements that helped the people and the religious people to achieve this catharsis through the sound, through the music. And it's so connected with symbols, and so it's not, we study the sources, the musical sources we have, but around this there's a much wider research on the historical fields, or in the philosophy, in the art, in the illustrations we find, in the poetry. And you see that all these are so connected with each other that it's, it's a very inspiring word to research and find some elements that somehow transform the way we see and the way we view music in general, art, and life.
I think this is the most important, and it's actually enchanting the fact that so many elements and fields are combined and merged. At the same time, you're making art.
I often
Yes.
think of what we do as kind of like applied anthropology. I mean, you never get to sort of see the people you're studying. They're long gone, but it feels more like that than an actual, musical endeavor sometimes.
Yes, and also the history and the combination of fantasy and the improvisation.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Sorry, I don't even know when it's a gap to invite me to talk. Yeah. I mean, the improvisation is an interesting thing as well, because I mean, in most cultures, most musical cultures, you don't logically separate improvisation and music making. Like, these are just one and the same. And in fact, in most sort of folk traditions, even in England, like, yeah, you have the tune, but improvisation is unremarkable, right? It's just pretty normal. We have, again, in Western classical music, a tradition which has removed that really to a very large extent. And you go into any sort of class in a conservatory, you will find a lot of people who are good musicians, very good musicians, excellent technically, spent decades sort of honing their craft. They can play all these concertos perfectly. But you ask them to improvise, and they will have a breakdown. Like they really, it's sort of been so removed from the basket of skills that we take on, but it's seen as a scary thing. Like, oh, but you have to know what you're doing. No, you don't. That's the point. So yeah, I mean, yeah, improvisation is of course integral to this music, because what else is there when all you presented with is essentially just a mnemonic, like on the page. It's how they essentially reminded themselves how the tune went. That's not actually how it all went, but that's just what they used to remind themselves. And yeah, you've got to be able to improvise. You've got to be able to do something around that, or you're going to have a very boring performance. But yeah, this separation is definitely a relatively new thing, I think. And I think you also sort of mentioned in the notes about multi-instrumentalists, and this again is just I've always been, I just like buying instruments. I mean, it's an addiction, but it's a normal thing, and it was a normal thing in Europe for pretty much ever until I think in the 19th century you start to see more specialization, not just in music, of course. Everyone becomes good at the one thing they do for their whole life. And again, now, I mean, I've encountered people who, when I tell them, oh yeah, I play this instrument and this instrument and I sing and I do this, like they'll say, oh, how can you get good enough at all of them? Like, which is again, I mean, there's so much loaded into that question. Like, what is good enough? And of course, for them, good enough is you can play concertos really, really, really well. Okay, if I wanted to do that, then being a multi-instrumentalist wouldn't really work. But for this sort of repertoire, it's just natural, because I mean, why not? Why wouldn't you? I mean, you don't have to spend hours, days learning each piece. So it fits in. And I just enjoy buying instruments. As I say, it's a hobby / addiction.
Thank you so much, Andrew. I would like to go on, and we need to learn more from you. I would like Jeremy, if you like, to please share historical information about medieval lute and its appearance in medieval illustration as one of the main instruments of medieval music.
Yes, thank you. I think many of us are familiar with lutes from iconography, especially of the Renaissance era. You picture this instrument that sort of has the shape of a pear with the peg box that is angled backwards and so on. One thing that distinguishes the medieval lute from later lutes is the fact that it was plucked with a plectrum of some sort rather than with the fingers. So, and this would have been pretty much any lute prior to, say, 1500 or so, would have been played with a sort of pick. So that could have been a quill, like a feather, or a piece of bone or wood or tree bark or leather or something. But the important thing is that, as opposed to being plucked with the fingers as later lutes were, you have this quite different sound that's produced by plucking with a plectrum. So this would have made a rather bright sound that was also more, I suppose you could say, more horizontal in nature. So more single line melodies with the occasional strummed chord, or perhaps some sort of drone on an adjacent string. So the sound of the medieval lute would have been quite different from that of, say, the Renaissance lute. We don't have any surviving instruments from the medieval time when we talk about lutes. There's a cittern, which is a sort of lute-like instrument that has a bit of a smaller body and a kind of flat back. And there's one of these from around 1450. So that's really the earliest lute-like instrument that we have. So when people attempt to reconstruct these instruments these days, they go back to paintings and frescoes and sculptures, and there's really an abundance of these. Starting really, I guess, in the 11th century, which is when these frescoes in Palermo, in the Cappella Palatina, I believe it's called, show these what would have been Arabic lute players who were wandering around Sicily at the time. So that's really kind of the earliest image of the lute in Europe, and then of course kind of pick your century and location, and you can find a lute in various images from that time. Another important source is the Cantigas de Santa Maria, that would have been 13th century Spain, that shows a number of lute-like instruments, and right up until into the 1300s now in Germany and France and north of the Alps, and of course many images from the 1400s. And actually the lute that I play on this album that we made would have been a lute from the late 15th century, so based on iconography from the 1490s, let's say, or early 1500s. So.
Wow, this was actually a deep dive into art history and music history.
Hopefully not too deep.
And just to mention also with in general, everything that we call medieval instruments, they're basically reconstructions and copies of what we see in iconography and illustrations, or in the visual art world, let's say, because we don't have instruments that remained, or we have very few that they're not so helpful. So what luthiers do is that they really research these sources, and they're trying to reconstruct and recreate according to what they see.
This is amazing. I would also like to ask Marguerite, how do recorders connect with nature?
Hello, thank you for your question. The recorder historically it's connected to many symbols, let's say. And I think the two main ones are shepherds, and there is also death, but that was more in the I would say late Renaissance and the Baroque area. So in the medieval times, probably we will stay on the shepherds. And yeah, I mean, it's a small instrument, and in the mountains and in the fields, I guess it was when it was played by shepherds, the sound was just, echoing on the sides of the mountains. And yeah, I guess like this is how we can connect the recorder with the nature the most. But also it's often said that the recorder has a very birdy sound, especially the small ones. And I guess in some tracks that we recorded in the album, this is also what I've been trying to convey, So using very small instruments that have very, very high pitches to imitate, maybe to some extent, the birds, although it's actually very difficult. Like there are also some whistles that are filled with water that can imitate bird sounds, actually, and also some little, it's called flageolet in French. I'm not sure how it's the name in English, but it's like some little whistles that you pull a little stick, and it changes the pitch also of the whistle, so it makes also some funny birdie sounds. So I guess like this is also how we can, because it's the same like the wind way is made the same way. This is how we can connect to the recorder. And I guess the recorder is also I would say a little bit more advanced instrument than maybe the ones the shepherds were, playing in the fields. They were just, cutting a branch and with their knives making a little flute and making some holes, and maybe it's not really in tune, but okay. And usually I guess this will be called a whistle, what they were doing. So only with 6 holes, whereas the recorder has 7. So there's a thumb hole always, and that makes the instrument a little bit more advanced technically, because the fingerings and the way of playing is not exactly the same. But still, like, you know, this is the instrument I play, and I'm trying also to take inspiration from all those, you know, stories, let's say, to feed my practice.
Thank you so much, Marguerite, for your insights.
Thank you.
I would also like to ask Ivan, what are the traditional and, let's say, cultural elements that influence your interpretation?
If you think about it, generally speaking, when you think of the big percussion cultures around the world, such as Afro-Cuban, Brazilian, African, Arabic, Indian, Europe doesn't make the list when you talk about percussion. I'm not saying it doesn't have percussion, but I've seen through a lot of research about folk music around the world and also in Europe, is that Europe has definitely been influenced by all these cultures, all these percussion cultures that have sort of got into it from one side or the other, either through Spain or maybe Italy with their tambourines, and a lot of Turkish percussion that definitely has come into Europe. And that also you can see in all the paintings we've been talking about. You can see all sort of drums that do definitely come from the Arabic world, which is, in this case for this album, is mostly what I used. I used tambourine, dohola, darbuka, and frame drum, which are all instruments that come from the Middle East. And as we talked before, when it comes to percussion and early music, I think I haven't done the research, but I'm pretty sure notation for percussion, or even writing that percussion is supposed to be there or what it's supposed to play, it's a very, very late thing. So it's been always a very improvised thing on the spot with, I guess, whatever you have there. And that's mostly what I really like about this group, this opportunity, is to just come up with what should I play here and how should I play it and what color does its song need. Because also one of the things we have is that we play a lot of church music when it comes to all these early music things, and percussion was really not a thing in the church. It was really frowned upon because it was, thing from other cultures, other religions even. So those are sort of the traditional and cultural elements that I've sort of mixed up together to come up with ideas for this music.
Thank you so much, Ivan. I would like to ask Kristia, what is the importance of philosophical influences in your work?
It's very important, and it's one of the most central they are the philosophical elements and the ideas we find in the sources are those that give us the inspiration to create and also translate into these ideas into music. For example, our album, the inspiration behind the album is nature and how the medieval philosophers and in general the medieval people considered nature as part of their life. Because I was reading this last week that the first illustration of the very ancient times, it was found in Indonesia, and it's a scene, of course, as we see many times, of an animal. And we also, through ancient times, what we see is that nature and animals are the main scenery and the main way of living of these people. So it's something so ancient and deep into our system that it's very interesting to research about this through time, since we have written texts and writings that we can read. So in the medieval thought, every natural element had and embodied the divine element. So that's a very interesting thought for us as performers, and for reading all the research behind that. I'm really sorry. Can I interrupt a bit, because the door opened and I am listening?
Of course, please do so.
Sorry. Okay, so back to nature. So we see that throughout the history of human nature is one of the most important themes in the survival. So we see in this connection to nature and the divine, we see that all the natural elements and ideas of fantasy that we find in this field are extremely important for the people back then. It was their way of life. There were shepherds around in these medieval villages, and then you had the huge church that it was. We have so many tall cathedrals because they give us the sense of something huge, that it's beyond the human existence. So, and through these huge temples are filled with music and sounds and later on polyphony. So these words, the church, the music of the church and the music of the shepherds, of the taverns, of the Dionysian pleasures, they're all connected somehow. And this is also what we tried to convey in our album and show how this inspiration from nature comes through all these different worlds, from the church, from the village, from the folk tradition.
Kristia, thank you so much for your insights. I would like to go on with Andrew. Would you share your thoughts on the educational importance and value of studying medieval music in today's world?
Yeah. Who gave me these? I didn't answer these questions. I get the difficult ones. Okay. I think for me, one of the most sort of useful things, let's say, is the sort of okay, let's recalibrate this one. So again, a lot of people have this idea of Europe, of medieval Europe being, sort of ancestor culturally, and how it, must be. If I was to go back to 1200, I'm sure it would blend in, right? But I think through studying the music and the philosophy and a lot of other things, you realize that there is a lot of distance between us and these people. I mean, yes, okay, that they are our ancestors, but we should be careful before thinking that there's, incredible commonalities. I mean, and I think once you have that, you then sort of you can apply that to other currently existing cultures and sort of see the links and the way things join up, but understanding that the differences are not necessarily, they can't be given qualities, they're not good or bad necessarily. I think I'm rambling here. I'm not sure where I'm going. So there's a lot of noise also outside my flat and I can't concentrate. Sorry, I'll start again. I'm not really sure how to answer the question. I mean, any sort of education of history and art is important in its way. I mean, I think people come across different arts and musics themselves. I don't know where I'm going with this. Sorry, I had a thought about this question and I couldn't really think of a good answer. I don't really know why it's important, honestly. Like, why should any art be specifically or particularly important in education? I mean, yeah, like the more things you're exposed to, the better, I think, and the more like unusual alien things you're exposed to, the better. And I think the realization that this sort of European culture is kind of alien to us is a good realization. I guess that's the thing. That's what I come down to, like understanding that our own past is not at all like us necessarily, and that when we interpret it, we are inevitably interpreting it through our modern lens. I think maybe that's the useful thing about it.
That's an out-of-the-box answer, and thank you so much. If anybody else wishes to add some things, of course, please do so.
I think Jeremy and Marguerite wanted to say something.
Well, I wanted a little bit of clarification about the question. I mean, are you asking about what sort of education are you talking? Are you talking about educating audiences? Are you talking about training musicians to play medieval music? Could you just clarify the question for us?
Of course, educating audiences. I think it's the aspect I would like to give to this question, because that's a very different field of music, medieval music, and that's why its importance, I think, it's highlighted in today's world.
Again, it's tricky.
I think it's mostly about sharing these ideas that we come across in medieval music that many times are, of course, universal and very similar to our contemporary ones, but also you can see different ways of thinking and different ways of perception of life, of religion, of nature, of music, of sciences, of
arts as well,
survival, of art, and it's beautiful to share, and it opens and widens our horizons as humans. And this is the reason, I guess, we research so much our history and the history of each science and each field, because it gives us a wider perception and we learn so much from this. So we learn, and this is powerful and inspiring and this is what we want to share with the audience.
I guess, I mean, I don't really think of it in terms of educating the audience. It's a bit, patrician. I present what I do and they take what they will from it. But I think experience is what it's about. And I do believe that like the wider range of experiences people have, the generally better they are. I think you can never have you can have bad experiences, I suppose, but unless they're terribly, really awful, that they're still going to be constructive in some way. You can go to a concert and hate it, and that's still a good thing, I think. And so, yeah, this just happens to be the unusual thing that I'm presenting. I found a thing that many people don't know about, and yeah, I want to show it to people. I think that's probably about as far as my desire to educate goes. But I think anyone who is performing a type of music which which maybe is not so well known, it's good. It's good to take it out to people, whatever it is, and expand their own horizons.
And also inspires people to learn more about not only the music, but also many symbols, history, art.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. And what I've often noticed about, well, Hildegard, sort of, especially the slightly later medieval stuff, it's some of this French 13th, 14th century. I mean, it's incredibly complex music. It sounds remarkably, well, it doesn't sound like people think medieval music will sound. They have their idea in their mind, which maybe is a little closer to Hildegard. But when you present this to people, yeah, you get a reaction, and they're really curious. Like, well, how are we making this kind of music? It's rhythmically complex. It's like harmonically very odd. Like, why are we making this? And then I don't know. Like, my idea is so different, and then you look a few hundred years later, and it seems to be simplified. I mean, of course, there's then a whole story to tell about why that happened. Yeah, I think you can open doors, changing ideas about past. I guess this is also an important thing for me, changing people's perceptions about the European past, because a lot of ideas about medieval Europe, a bit kind of Disney. And it was a lot more interesting and colorful than people, I think, imagine. And the culture was so different, as Kristia said. Like, there are similarities. We come from the same philosophical heritage, of course. There is some heritage going through a lot of this, but the perception was different. And this is another important thing, that our own perceptions, again, are not universal. They're not, there's nothing distinctly human about the particular way that we look at the world. And I think seeing that our own ancestors had a very different view of the world is also inevitably a good thing. I think, yeah, that'd be what I'd say about it.
Yes, Marguerite, please.
About educating the audience, I have the impression that it's also about curiosity, very simply, okay, like they're doing something that I don't know about. Okay, let's go see what it is. And then maybe it will, resonate with what I already know. And I think this is the most important. And this is actually how, as Andrew was saying, like this is how everything works. When we go to, encounter some new art or actually or science or anything, it's about, okay, I have my own experience, and then what I put myself in an uncomfortable situation. I put myself in front of something I don't know, and how does it resonate with my own experience that I already have? And I think like this is just the core of going to meet anything that you don't know. And yeah, I think that's how it works, and that's what is interesting about it.
And maybe it's a different type of audience as well. For me, it's an interesting. I like working with this group because a lot of what I do, it's standard classical music. Yeah, when people go to see a Bach Passion, they know what they're going to see. Like, I mean, they might even have gone for that exact soloist or whatever. Like, they have a very specific idea. And if you mess up, if you don't give them what they want, they're not going to be pleased. Maybe they'll be surprised, but a lot of the times, people know what they want Bach to sound like. Whereas, yeah, people come to our concerts not having a clue. Frankly, sometimes I don't have a clue what's going to happen in our concerts. And then this is also a very liberating experience as a musician, I think, also to be sort of slightly treading into this unknown territory. I feel much more in common with this group. I used to play a lot of folk music, go to folk festivals. That is totally the feel I have with this group, as opposed to like some of the early music ensembles I perform with, where, yeah, maybe there's more or less freedom, maybe, but like there is an expectation of a certain sound, a certain approach. Whereas, yeah, we have a lot of space, and that's as an artist a really, really satisfying thing.
And another thing is that because mainly the only audio source we have is oral tradition, is folk music that was preserved through oral tradition. So in order to perform this music,
That's a this is a classic.
We connect. We connect words somehow. So we connect. We bring elements, as Ivan said, from different cultures and folk music. We also connect it with the Western world and what we know from Western classical music. So it's a very beautiful combination of bringing different cultures together, and in a way, this is not maybe preserve, but present them to the audiences.
I just had a thought there about preservation. People often, I mean, I knew you wouldn't go fully down that road, but this idea of, oh, we can trace for tradition, we can see, which of course is hopeless. I mean, and one of the most interesting ones is actually English cathedral music, where you have got an unbroken tradition for close to 1,000 years now, in some of these cathedrals. And there was this thinking, in the 19th century, of course, that, well, therefore, how we do it today, like, obviously must be pretty similar to how they did it back then, because it's an unbroken tradition, which of course is mad. I mean, every time you get a new director of music in, everything goes upside down. So yeah, the sort of idea of this unbroken tradition you can trace, it's very comforting, but inevitably there are problems. But yeah, indeed, I think what we do is we just take we take things from different traditions, different sources. And I don't think we at all pretend what we do is historically informed or authentic in that sense. And I know I've come across some people, I think, who came to our, or at least maybe didn't come to performances, but they've listened to what we did, and I think they thought that we were like historically informed, and then they were like, I was very surprised, or like criticizing me about it afterwards. And so, but we never claimed. You put that on yourself. So that's the other thing about, yeah. Yep. Marguerite, I think.
Yes.
But also, what does today historically informed or playing ancient music or playing early music or playing authentic music, like there are so many debates already about this. So I find it also difficult to, even like this term is like not everybody agrees on it. So how do we get to talk about the same thing, just to answer to what you just said, Andrew?
Yeah, no, I mean, I've gone for a journey with this, as I said before. I really believed in the historically informed idea when I started off, as a lot of people did, a lot of people do. I think as I've moved on, it's become far less important to me. Not to say I reject it entirely or anything. I mean, I think I recognize more, as you're sort of hinting at, the sort of philosophical problems at the core of it, like ultimately, how can you ever know? The fact that we are all ultimately interpreting these sources through our modern minds, and it's really difficult. It's impossible to shake that off. We can't look at something or listen to something in the same way that they would have done back then. Even the way we present this stuff, in a concert with all these people sitting in rows and listening attentively, this is fundamentally foreign. This would have been strange to people from back then. They would have been very confused. I think the closest traditions that we have, which are maybe they would recognize, are indeed the church traditions, where we actually perform them in masses or whatever. That, at least there would be a lot of differences, like why is the altar facing the wrong way? Why are they speaking not in Latin? But the fundamental thing would have looked at least fairly similar. So for me, yeah, I mean, I've not rejected it, but I sort of step outside. For me, the more interesting question now is, what does it mean to, sorry, meta now. What does it mean to say that I am performing something in a historically informed manner in the year 2024? What is that, like, in the broader sense? And I think very often, this is not a question that's dealt with in the early music scene. But I think, I mean, there's no right or wrong answer to it. But I think it's one that's always worth considering. What is our social function? All music has ever been, if you want to sort of take the very sort of dry look at it, I guess, is a social tool. It has a social function, it always has. What is the social function of what we do compared to what Hildegard was doing? And there you have you have a whole essay, I think, there. It's a whole area of thought. yeah, that's what I exist these days, I think, in terms of my approach.
Of course, Marguerite.
Yeah, so I completely agree with you, Andrew. But still, I think we are historically informed. We'll create an inside debate. Because I mean, we go to the sources when you know we go to the manuscripts and we go to iconography and also some secondary sources, but for sure, I think we're not authentic because, as we said before, is it even possible? Like, yeah. So, yeah. And also to come back to what you were saying about presenting it to an audience, and presenting ideas. I think also again this is the core of it. Like we don't know how they were doing it, but at least we have the ideas and how we can interpret them. So the interesting part of this whole journey is to present the ideas and show, look, like this is what we came up with and this is how it resonates. So for example, like I came across, for example, just talking about Hildegard and just her model and like her life and like how inspiring this is and how me as a woman living in 2024 can relate to this. Like this is just so inspiring. And for me also presenting those kind of things to the audience is the most important part of it, you know.
I think so too. So I mean, it just feels like a sort of just the two of us discussing on a TV show now. Another thing for me, which I always find interesting and very disappointing when it's not there in museums and concert programs, or whatever, is kind of and it's I do politics as well, is when they remove that side of things, a really temporal, gritty side of things. I mean, Hildegard existed in a time heavily political. I mean, she spent a lot of her life dealing with the church hierarchy in its politics, in its purest sense. And, you know, who has the power, who gets to use it? And I think it's always interesting also to make sure audiences are aware that this is timeless. You know, this, you know, we again made this imagined medieval period, but like, I think a lot of the daily, you know, a lot of things in the background are always quite similar, even if they have a different color, different shape. Yeah, this is also, but the music's a way into that. It's a very relatively accessible way into that. Like you can look at, yeah, you can show audience manuscripts or paintings, but there is something which people feel, rightly or wrongly, they feel straight away a sort of connection with music, which, I recognize this feels familiar. I mean, despite the distance and despite the different social contexts, I think music is a really good way of getting into that. Yeah, cool. Anyway, someone else talk. This has become too philosophical.
Yes, Peter.
Well, I would like to add, as an observer, commentator at the same time, few thoughts from this insightful discussion. Personally, from the point of view, for example, of a publication like Thrausma, which is a fusion of art and philosophy, when we came up with Viriditas, what we received was a clear message about something interdisciplinary. And we didn't stay only on music. And I think from this point of view, if we want to abandon the traditional connotations for what education means, education is something very dynamic and is not related with schooling or any kind of schooling. So what was important for us is that from the first sight of your cover, your description text about this album, and the whole choice of the selection generally of the tracks and what you did with this production, we receive the synthesis that goes beyond music. So from this point of view, it's something educated, because many people, even just reading the description, not many people know the life of Hildegard von Bingen. And even if someone wants to start from the biography of this woman, immediately is connected with not only history, certain part of the European history, but about philosophy, theology, and the conflicts of an era. Because this woman is a symbol that at the same time represented a certain part of a conflict, and how we should understand what conflict is inside the tradition or inside the heritage generally. So for me, the whole album of Viriditas, even the choice of the name Viriditas, is something that gives an educational challenge or opportunity to the audience to go through the music, your music, to something more broad. So from this point of view, I think that is very important, the whole discussion for us, and that's why we really feel blessed to have the opportunity to discuss together and understand your whole perception about our definition for the heritage, because we do not believe that heritage is something that has to do with the past or the representations of the past, but it's something that all the time define certain aspects of the present and the future, because at the center of heritage is the evolution, is the project of evolution, that humanity, culture, societies, different aspects of society, of continents, even through ruptures, even through conflicts, actually boosting all the time evolution. So I think that, just an insight from my point of view on our discussion.
Yes, it's very, thank you so much for your comment. And it's also something that we tried to share in the album through the liner notes. Somehow these connections that we find through time, for example, we find at some points some religious elements that are connected to the ancient Greek religion, and how they were translated into Christianity, and how this has to do with also pagan European religious elements. So it's exactly this evolution that as human beings we always take from what we know, what Marguerite says, we take from our own experiences, and we add or connect and create something that is new, if we can say this word, for the history of humanity. And this is, I think, something important in the interpretation of medieval music and in the study of
I think we lost you, Kristia. We lost connection. Can you hear us? Yes, okay. But
Can I add something? It's this fantastic, for me, this fantastic decision of Sibil Ensemble to make a narrative for us today, because the majority of the people all the time, living through stereotypes. Medieval music is something certain, and we have here a certain project that is trying to build a narrative that we can, get through today in 21st century. And this is very important. For me, at the same time, it has a certain kind of modernism, because not only how the whole ensemble uses the social media, or the video promotion. If I'm not wrong, guys, you received an award about the video of the presentation of the album. So this is something that has to do with a certain decision that we want to build a narrative for our generation, to speak today for this kind of music or through this kind. For me, this is the most important thing, that goes against any kind of classicism or stereotypes, what means Baroque, what means medieval, what means Renaissance music, etc., etc. So I have in my mind the book of Gilles Deleuze about Baroque and Leibniz, because through this book and through the philosophical insights of Gilles Deleuze, I started to listen Baroque music. So in his age, it was a modernist approach, how we have to be interdisciplinary about this kind of evolution. So yeah, great. Sorry for the interruption.
No, thank you. And thank you for pointing out these thoughts, because they are truly, it's amazing to see that at least few people understand what we want to do and resonate with our vision.
I think this is interesting. I mean, I always have a feel when music is described as evolving, this Darwinian thing, I always get a bit uncomfortable. But I don't. Yeah, maybe it's true though. I mean, but anyway, that's a broader question. But certainly, I mean, one thing which I think people slip into, because yeah, we have these periods, Renaissance, Baroque. It's all very blocky, nice, sort of delineated, which leads people into this idea, and you get taught it in music college, but this is a sort of linear development of music, and that within each culture, it's sort of weirdly static. I mean, and of course, once you go even below the first level, that's not true, but for a lot of people, that's the perception. And I think this sort of idea of stasis of culture, it's quite dangerous. I think it's also the root of nostalgia as well, that things can stay the same. They have stayed the same in the past, right? And so they should. And I guess what I hope, when you bring something from so far in the past to the present and show it to people in, what is definitely a modern way. And as you say, I think there's a lot of modernist ideas in not just what we do, but in general, the historically informed movement, oddly enough. You can show that things don't stay the same. Things very rarely stay the same for long. And maybe we've had a period of stasis this half century or so, but you can't expect things not to change. And right now, as a British person who's trying not to watch the news too much, there are a lot of people who are quite resistant to change. And there's other things going on as well, of course. But I think as a culture, the society here in, the sort of, in the Netherlands, for example, I mean, man, I could go on for hours about sort of the conservatism here in its deep level, like, they're quite resistant to change, but it's going to happen. It's going to happen quite quickly in the years ahead, I think, and people need to be, prepared for that. Not even emotionally, but on some philosophical level, need to be accepting about that. Maybe I'm getting grand ideas, but maybe in some little way presenting bits of European culture which are actually not like our culture. You can sort of plant the seed of this idea that it's okay. Things can change and it's okay. They'll get worse, they'll get better,
Yes, Margaret?
Just to add a little something, already if you look at how, for example, Saint Matthew Passion by Bach was interpreted in the 60s and how it is played today, like, it has nothing to do. And already, like, I think this is the moment when this idea that heritage is actually evolution, that it's interesting to, well, at least to look at it this way.
But also
what I wanted to add.
But also the heritage is ours to do what we want with. So when Bach's Passions were first rediscovered, let's say, by Mendelssohn, Like they took them apart. They removed entire bits. They put new things in. They reorchestrated. Like it wasn't seen as this sacred object which we must preserve and maintain. That just wasn't part of their thinking. It was, oh, this is a really great thing. Let's now make it suitable for our own times. Now we've developed since then, the museum culture, this idea of preservation. But this also, it's a very conservative idea. And I'm not saying it's not a worthy idea. And of course, there are many things that we should seek to preserve, I think. But I think within music, it's a very odd thing. I mean, you just look at the sort of reverence sometimes that we get, even the word, the score, the music, as if this is the music. I mean, these bits of paper. And the reverence we give to the markings on these bits of paper, which, that the scribe was rushed off his feet. I mean, they make mistakes all the time. I mean, it's preservation's a difficult thing, and you can go too far and it becomes dead, desiccated eventually. And I mean, definitely what we do is not that. I mean, that's one thing I can be happy with. But yeah, evolution and preservation are not always, they're different, they're totally separate.
But I was also thinking before that, sorry, Kristia. I was also thinking before that it's like comparing music to language. Like language is like, it's evolving all the time, and like it's just as simple as this. We cannot keep it the way we were talking.
And then you do find people
century.
People who get pedants who get very upset when language changes. You see them online all the time. I may be one of them occasionally. There are some things which are important, but yeah, I think that's a good comparison, I think. And in both music and language, there are people who love the change, people who don't really notice it, and then people who are quite angry about it one way or the other.
And what I was thinking is that, as animals, our physical abilities are not that great, but the difference is that our creativity and our sense of the self or the social connections we have with each other, and through this we cannot preserve music as it was, or sound. It's not within our abilities, but we have these creative minds that they can transform, they can imagine, and these elements are so strong that it's very beautiful to see how, at least from the moment that we have the recordings, the first recordings, which has been one of the elements of preserving music, to see how this changes through the 19th century till now.
But of course, I mean, the advent of recording, I think, fundamentally changed our perception of music, maybe. I mean, I can't even imagine thinking about music without recording. Like, I don't know, how can I imagine a world of music with no recordings? It's impossible. And we can't even begin to get there.
Yeah, it's part of us.
Margaret?
I also wanted to say that this is, for me, actually the most interesting thing about this whole discussion is that how does we use only one material, like let's say musical material, and just observe how it changes through the years and the maybe just time area, like I'm not okay again. So for me, the most interesting thing about this whole discussion is that if we take one material, so let's say a Hildegard song, and we look at how it was interpreted 40 years ago, and then 20 years ago, and then now, the most interesting thing is actually looking at how it was interpreted and what it says about us as humans and the time we were living in, and how our environment is just inspiring us and influencing us. I think this is the most interesting for me. as a performer as well. The most
what this music, what this type of music really provides is the space for that. Both musically in a very sort of, you know, in the sense that we sort of realize straight away when you like, oh, let's figure out an arrangement for this piece, and it's all we have is just one A4 side of notes, you know, not even a rhythm. We have to figure out what to do with that. So you have a lot of space, but also it's the idea of cultural baggage. I mean, this is related to what I said earlier. Like, you know, Bach has a lot of cultural baggage. Like there is expectation, whereas what we do, there's some, of course, and some people have their opinions, but there's not that pressure, you know. Whatever we do with this, it's all okay. No one's going to come and tell us off normally. I guess they might sometimes.
Yeah, but even in Bach, I think you can see this. And I was also thinking not only about music, but for example about staging some how is it called? Theater plays. If you look at how it was done, I don't know, 40 years ago, and now it's just not the same. And some people do it still how it was done 40 years ago, and some people do it like, you know, you never saw this before, and that's also very interesting about it. It says, I think, lots of things about us and the world we live in.
Yes, Peter?
Well, I would like to add and at the same time ask all the members of the ensemble an idea about if you have this feeling that you rematerialize or giving an important reuse to spaces during your concerts and even during your recordings. And what I want to say is that we have very good friends that have an organization in Firenze, in Italy. They called it Reuse. And they created projects on the archaeological sites about how today, not ideally, how today could be reused even for society or for the art generally, for artists and art projects today. And when I have in mind your experience, how is the experience to create music to spaces that if you never go there to do something like your music, it will be impossible these spaces to have a new life again. So I strongly believe that at the same time, this kind of project like yours has a certain architectural radicalism, because otherwise we know very well which will be the destiny of this kind of spaces, especially in, you know, from all these madness of real estate that today invading all the European cities. How do you feel that? If I am close to you, I do not know.
I like that metaphor. Also, like expanding it to like, yeah, as if this material that we find, this music we use, yeah, we're reusing it ultimately. We can't at all claim that we're even representing it. We're reusing it in our own way. And yeah, I think that's an interesting, I hadn't thought about it in that way, but that's yeah, is a really interesting take on it. And I say it's important. These things exist, and why not? Why shouldn't we reuse them? But this, I mean, in the Netherlands, about the buildings as well, like, you know, they have all these huge churches. I mean, it's incredible. Like, you know, the small towns with the church that is, you know, the size of a British cathedral. But of course, this was for a very different time, and congregations don't really exist in that sense. And a lot of these churches, some of them have been deconsecrated, but even the ones that haven't, yeah, they are being reused. They've been turned into venues and into spaces for people to, you know, discover other things in other ways. And I guess this is, if we're going to talk about heritage, this maybe is part of it. Like, the way we use our heritage might change, and then we have to decide whether it's important or not to actually, you know, maintain the building, the music, whatever. But that's a discussion. So yeah, actually that does work. I like that. Thank you.
Yeah, I love this concept of musical reuse. I hadn't heard that before, but yeah, in a way, that's exactly what we do with the music of Hildegard and the other medieval music that we've recorded. And you know, we can also go back and reuse concepts from back then. For instance, we have this wonderful account of Hildegard performing her music with her fellow nuns. You know, they're all dressed in white and they're performing in the round with their hair down, and you know, it was, people were actually complaining about this, which is why we why we know about it. You know, somebody wrote in a letter, these women are performing this music in this scandalous way, right? But you know, we can take ideas like that and then yeah, reuse or recycle them in our own way here. And then the other thing that I was going to add, just in terms of the you know, using old spaces, historical spaces for performing the music, you know, many of these buildings have the kind of acoustical properties that that are often lacking in newer buildings. You know, often new buildings can be quite dry acoustically, just because of the materials that were used, or the you know, the limitations of the space and so on. And I think that what you find in these older buildings, especially religious buildings, but not only, you find these incredibly resonant spaces. And certainly when we talk about cathedrals and churches, I mean, these were spaces where people really took that into consideration when they were building these wonderful buildings. And you know, these were spaces where music was meant to be performed and heard. And so I think it's these are really ideal spaces for our music in many ways.
Just as a quick aside, one of my favorite things about historically informed performance is that a lot of the stuff that we do know is only because of letters of complaint. It's people moaning about stuff, or people, or you know, a letter about how they hate this particular individual and the way that they play their music. It's great. It's so petty. Some things don't change. Some things are definitely universal. Humans are humans.
Okay, anyone wants to add something? Any thoughts? Of course, Margaret, please.
I wanted to add something, I think, several times in the discussion, but I didn't manage. But I just need to order a little bit my thoughts. Because now we were a little bit off topic. So it was about, we're talking, I think, about audiences and how to bring medieval music in the contemporary world. And I think Kristia was saying something about the practice in the churches, I think, right, Kristia? I don't remember exactly. Anyways, I had this thought that maybe it's a very personal view, but I have the impression that music is a way to connect to our spirituality in any, you know, any way we have a conception of it inside ourselves. And maybe also playing medieval music and trying to connect to the spirituality that they used to have back then, and also connecting to our own, is actually a way to bring it back to the contemporary world. And if it's clear. I don't know if it's clear what I'm saying. And then I have also the impression that with Viriditas and talking about nature, maybe actually the spirituality lies in the nature, and this is also a way we can connect to today's world. And Viriditas talks about God being in the nature, but also where is the nature today? You know, we live in cities, and it's like we maybe see one tree here and there, but I think, at least for me, the way I see it is how can, if I go to a concert of such a concert, to such a concert and talking about nature, I will think, okay, how can I actually reconnect with this nature that used to be all around but is all gone, and it is actually so important. And I think Viriditas talks, for me at least, about this, about how, okay, wait a minute, what is going on, and what is around me, and what do I want to see around me, and how do I want to connect to my environment? I think, yeah.
Yeah, because this is interesting. I mean, with a link to spirituality and nature. I mean, we sort of, you know, okay, I mean, I'm speaking from my own beliefs here. I don't mean to offend anybody, but, you know, we invented gods to explain natural phenomena, things that we saw in the world that we didn't really understand. And of course, as our understanding has expanded, the necessity for gods has decreased, for better, I think, mostly, and yeah, for worse. I mean, we need a bit of mystery, I think, sometimes in our lives. So yeah, how do we? Then the problem also is this duality, like so many dualities. There's a falseness to it. Like how we are not separate from nature, man and nature. I mean, like it's senseless. You know, we are from nature. We have a relationship with it, whether we notice it or not. And of course, this is the deeper kind of thing here, that we are, I think, going to become much more aware of that that relationship over the coming decades, and how it's a two-way relationship. And it's a big question. It's a big, scary question. Like how do we get back to this? How do we recognize that we have to learn to not be as consumptive? We have to learn to respect what's around us and understand that we have an impact. It's yeah, that's a big question that I realize I've opened up, and I don't want to think about it. But yeah, it's difficult to think, what do we, as artists, how do we react to that? It's such a terrifying prospect. But yeah, we do something. We do what we can.
But then in the end, also, this is how Viriditas and what our work in general resonate with, I think, today's world. We play medieval music, but actually it is so actual. Like those issues are so important today. And just also talking about Hildegard and the role of women in music, and then about nature, like it's so meaningful today, I think, and it's so important to talk about this. So yeah.
I totally agree with you, Marguerite, and thank you for mentioning and highlighting that, because we live in a very difficult period concerning our connection to nature. This is something that troubles me as well, personally and professionally, and in all aspects, of course. Also the aspect of arts as an artist. So I totally agree with you, and thank you for highlighting them.
Yes, yes. And just as a final comment, if I may say so, it's that, you know, as humans, our memory is limited and we tend to forget. So in moments that few of us, and thankfully, so yes, that we tend to forget, and the moments we spent being around nature and really having our senses open. It's this feeling of ecstasy that Viriditas is actually. This is how we experience Viriditas, and also in the in the sources we have of the concept. And this is what we tried through music to share this ecstasy and this state of being, in order to somehow state this importance of us humans remembering who we are as body, as mind, spirit, whatever. Thank you very much.
I'd like to thank you all very much for having this spontaneous talk.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.